let's make a beautiful padded sunglasses cover together. These are the resources that you're going to need to make a sunglasses case. So I've gone for 2 complementary fabrics, one for my outer, one for my lining. You could have the same, it's just easier for me to show you with 2 different. I'm going to pad my sunglasses case out with some wadding. You're going to need pins or some clips, whichever one you prefer, or use a mixture of the 2. You'll need a coordinating thread for your fabric because you are going to see it on the top stitching. Some fabric scissors. This is called a flex frame. You can find details on my website. I'm going to use a chopstick as a point turner. You could equally use a corner shaper or a pencil, something along those lines. And then these are the pattern pieces you're going to need. You can download these free from my website, www.oodlesofcraft.com, and search for freebies. There's also a link below. Once you've downloaded the pattern pieces and instructions from my website, you can clearly see how to get this made. So there are 2 pattern pieces. I've cut them out already. This is the main body of the sunglasses case, or just glasses case. You are going to need to cut 6 of these. We need 2 from your main fabric, 2 from your lining fabric, and we also need 2 from wadding or fusible fleece, whichever you prefer. For the second pattern piece, this is for the channel at the top that the flex frame is going to go into. So this could be either your main fabric or your lining fabric, it doesn't matter, it will be seen. So as long as they're coordinating, it will look lovely. But you need to cut 2, either from main or from your lining. I'm going to use the edge of this fabric, which is called the selvage edge, to line up against the long edge of my pattern piece. So as long as I'm in line, I know that I'm cutting my pattern straight. Because I need 2 of these from my main fabric, I'm actually going to cut 2 together. I've got nice sharp fabric scissors, so it should be fine. So I'm going to fold over from the edge, just make that a little bit smaller so I can save as much fabric as possible for future projects. Because these 2 edges seem to be really well lined up already, I'm just going to line that up at the top. That saves me cutting that edge. And then you could either pin your pattern piece on as I am doing. So make sure it's gone through both layers. There's no puckering up underneath. And just make sure that no pins stick out from the side of the pattern piece, because that just means you're going to find it hard to cut. So everywhere that you need to cut, so I've already got a cut line here, so I'm going to cut down here, across and back up. Because there's quite a gap here and I don't want my cutting to go inside there and force me to not have a straight line, I'm just going to pop a few more pins into that long edge. There we go. Just check the back to make sure that nothing got puckered up. And then you're going to use your fabric scissors. So fabric scissors have a nice long blade and they are super sharp. You're going to rest this bottom blade against the table, and then you're going to open your blade almost as wide as they will go, comfortably for you to hold, and take big long cuts like that. That will make sure that you get quite a straight edge on your fabric. If you take lots of little cuts like this, you're more likely to have a jagged edge when you cut. You always cut away from yourself, so don't kind of cut up here and then turn a corner and then try and come back on yourself. Because this is secure and pinned, you just need to make sure that you turn it so that you can comfortably cut it in a straight line. So I am going to go up this line here. So resting my blade against the table, you should hear a really satisfying sound. Long sweeping cuts. And then I'm not going to turn the corner of my wrist. I would rather cut in a straight line, so I'm going to move things around to make it easier for me. It's all about getting a nice straight line If you have a straight line, then your sewing line is going to be so much easier to do, and also you will find it easier to make sure that there are no holes when you're sewing. So that's 2 pieces from the outer. I'm going to do exactly the same for the lining fabric and for the wadding. Then do your second pattern piece and repeat the process. All my cutting is done. I've got 2 pieces of wadding, 2 for my lining, 2 of my outer fabric, and 2 of the channel for the top of the sunglasses for the flexi frame to go in. I've chosen to go with the lining fabric, just then you can see easier how I'm constructing it, but you could have picked your outer fabric as well. To create the channel for the flex frame to go through, like this one, you are going to take the short edges of your rectangle for the channel and make sure that your fabric is facing right side down. So this is self-coloured, so it doesn't matter which way I put the lining fabric down. If you're using your main fabric, you want the right side of the fabric, the front of the fabric, to face your ironing board, and you're looking at the wrong side of the fabric. So you're folding this down by 1/2 centimetre and then 1/2 centimetre again and giving it a press. Keep your fingers away from the iron, and once it's pressed you could put a pin or a clip in place just to make sure that that doesn't move anymore. We'll do the same to the other side. So we're folding over by about 1/2 centimetre to the wrong side of the fabric, folding again, and then iron that down. Your 2 rectangles should still be the same width once you have completed it. We're then going to take it to the sewing machine and sew these folded edges down. So in the machine, we'll be sewing this way. We're going to sew, if you sew down the middle that would be fine, but I would say slightly towards that inner folded edge would be preferable. You're going to start sewing at this long edge, you're going to sew down to the bottom and stop, and then you'll pop it back into the machine again. You'll start at the top, sew down to the bottom and stop. Don't worry about reverse stitching for these. You are going to be sewing the ends into another section later. Just make sure your stitches start close to the edges and finish close to the edges. At the machine, I have a stitch length of number 3 and I'm on a straight stitch. My stitch length is 3, which on your machine might be a medium length stitch, just something that copes with the different layers we have available. So I'm going to position my folded edge in place, and then I am going to sew from the long edge down to the bottom long edge. Once done, pull your threads out to the side and cut them there, and then you can see where my stitches are. Do the same for all 4 short folded edges. The final step with your channel is then to fold them in half so that the long edge meets the other long edge. So remember, your right side of the fabric is facing the table and you're going to hide those folded edges inside. So we line up these 2. Give it a little finger press so that your fingers don't need to go near the iron, and then press those in half. So the right side of the fabric is now facing the outside, and your channel for your flex frame is then made. The next step is to piece together the actual sunglasses case. Let's create the glasses case together now. So we're going to position our wadding down first, and then we're using our outer fabric right side up, so right side up on top of it. So we will have lining behind our main fabric. We're then going to take our channel that opens up like this, so the raw edges are lined up with the raw edges at the top of the sunglasses case. The folded edge is pointing downwards, and you also want to make sure that you are an equal distance from either side, so that needs to be positioned in the middle and then with the raw edge lining up. The final piece is your lining piece. So for me it's the same colour front and back, so it doesn't matter which way down I position it. If you are using a patterned fabric, or it does matter, you want to put it right side down, so all the right sides are hidden inside, and the outside that we can now see is the wrong sides of the fabric. So I'm going to clip all of those layers in place, trying to make sure that I don't move any of those sections. So make sure that this hasn't dropped down. So it's wadding, outer fabric right side up, channel with the raw edges at the top and in the middle, lining fabric right side down. So there's one, and make sure you do that to your next section as well. We're now going to sew across this top clipped edge to keep all of those in position, and we're using a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So your fabric is going to go into your machine like this, you're going to reverse, sew, reverse. 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm going to press and hold my reverse button. You might have a lever, and if you have a lever you're going to have to press and hold it as long as you want it to go backwards. So same for me with the button, I press and hold it and it will go backwards towards my edge, and then when I let go I can sew forwards. Stop when you reach your pins and clips, take them out before you continue to sew. And then when you get to your edge, you're going to reverse to secure those stitches. Just 2 or 3 stitches will do. Lift, remove, and cut those loose threads. So as you can see, it's a bit clearer from the back. Snip those threads. You're just sewing those down with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I would recommend using a stitch length of 3.5 because you're going through lots of layers. So that's a medium length stitch. Do the same for your next section. I now want to top stitch my channel in place. So I'm going to lift my lining fabric up and away, and then I am tucking my channel up towards the lining, but I've also made sure that this bulky seam is pointing down and sitting on top of the other bulky seam. So at the moment, at the top here, I've only got the channel and the lining. Everything else is pointing downwards. So for this one, I'll do the same. I'm lifting that up and lifting the channel up, but I also want to lift and push the wadding down away from the lining, so downwards. And what we're then going to do is top stitch just along this outer edge. So top stitching usually means approximately 0.5 centimetre or 1/4 inch from this sewn line that you've already done. And what we're doing is catching this section that's folded underneath it at the back. So to make sure that stays, I'll just pop a clip and maybe a pin in there so that I know that that section is pointing downwards when I sew. I'm going to do the same for this one, making sure that those two are facing up, everything else is facing down. Pin it to trap that seam allowance in place underneath, so it's facing downwards. And then we are going to reverse, so reverse. I'll show you on the machine. So I'm just positioning my fabric underneath. So check that your seam allowance is pointing towards the wadding and that your channel is sat on top of the lining. All the bits with wadding are on this side, all the bits without wadding are on this side. And you're just going to reverse, so reverse. I'll show you where my stitch line is when I've finished. So as you can see, my top stitching is fairly close to the previous stitch line that I had done. And if I look from the back, that seam allowance has been trapped and stuck down in place. Do the same for your second piece. Now that your two sections have been completed, it's time to piece everything together. So to begin with, just make sure that all of your edges, so your wadding is still matching up with your fabric, because when you piece this together you don't want to end up with a hole. So place one of your pieces down right side up, and then its matching piece, you are going to match the lining to the lining and the main to the main, but you are putting this one right side down over the top. So I'm making sure that all those raw edges meet up all the way around the outside, and then I'm just going to double check that this seam is in line with this one in the middle. Likewise, if I fold that one back and I see it, and your channels should both be pointing towards your lining, remember. For speed, I'm just going to pop some clips in. You could use pins instead, it wouldn't be a problem. Make sure there's plenty holding all of this together. Make sure that you've got both layers, nothing's been left out. Same with the main section with all those wadding layers. Now when we come to sewing this, we're actually going to need to leave a gap in our lining. So I'm just going to use a fabric marker, or you could pop 2 pins in position where you would like it to go. We just want it to be something along those lines, so big enough so that we can pull our project through the gap. So maybe the width of your hand, just those fingers, but you do want to sew in towards it first. So when we are sewing this together at the machine, you're going to start at the gap, so leave the opening, we don't want anything there. Maybe I'll put some pins in there to show you, we definitely don't want to sew that section. That's your no-go zone. So you're going to start here with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. You're going to reverse to your mark or your pin, whatever it is you've done to say that that's where your gap is going to start. So you're going to reverse for a few stitches, sew to the corner, make sure at the corner your needle is down. You're going to sew all down this length, and if you're doing it by 1 centimetre, you shouldn't catch the channel that's hiding under here. So it's really important you get your seam allowance correct. You don't want to sew over your channel, otherwise you won't get your flex through. So we're going to sew all the way down here, needle down at the corner, across, needle down, up, needle down, and then sew to the other side of your gap and reverse. So it's reverse, sew, 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 reverse. So I'm popping this in my machine, making sure I have a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So I'm trapping my fabric near the gap, then to sew backwards for a few stitches, so reverse, and then sew towards your edge. When you think you're 1 centimetre away, put your needle down. So I have a needle down button, but I can also wind my hand wheel at the side of the machine towards me, and this needle goes down into the fabric. Once it's down, I can then lift, spin, and I haven't lost my place. Trap and sew. It's just remembering to trap when you use that technique. Stop and take pins and clips out as you go. Take your time over this section. Because it's quite bulky, your presser foot's going to struggle a little bit more going over the top, so take it nice and slowly. Remember, I've got a longer stitch length to cope with those layers. The corner, needle down, lift, spin, trap and sew. Needle down, lift, spin. You do one more stitch, a little bit closer to the edge. Lift, spin, trap and sew. As I get to this bulky edge, go a little bit slower. You want this to go underneath. If you're struggling, just put the needle down to hold your position. Everything nice and flat. Needle down, lift, spin, trap and sew. Now I've got to my gap. Remember, I put marks, but I also put pins to remind me. Anything that's different to remind you is great. So now I've got towards my mark, I'm just going to do some reverse stitches just to secure those stitches in place. Your threads, front and back, do the ones from the other side, and we can turn it through. Once you've finished your sewing, you know you've got a gap here, you're happy with everything, just check both sides. We want to make sure that all of the layers have been caught in and that nothing underneath slid across without you noticing. If it did, now's the time to address it. We're now going to carefully cut the corners. So all of this bulk here, when we turn it through the right way, it needs to squeeze into this tiny gap, and that's not great because it's going to give us curly corners. So I'm just going to snip the corners. So I've not gone through my stitching. I've just gone close to get rid of the bulk, but not all the way through. And I'm going to do that for all 4 corners. Snip that off, that's frayed there. And then you're going to reveal your sunglasses case. So what we're going to do is turn it the right way through. So we're pushing, using my fingers to kind of push that fabric up through the gap. And then once I can't push anymore, I need to go and dig and find it. It's hiding inside. So keep turning it through. And then with your fingers, try and find where those corners were to start with. So you've got a rough idea of where they are. Obviously they're all curly at the moment. I'll give you a tip for that. I'll do the same with these top corners inside the lining. And then I'm going to use a chopstick. You could use a corner shaper. You could use a pencil if you had to. It's better if it's not got anything that can mark your fabric. And what you're going to do is just gently ease those corners out. So don't push too hard. I don't want you to burst through your stitches. If for any reason you did, you're going to have to turn it back through inside out again and solve that problem. Now I'm going to stick my chopstick, this is why I like a chopstick, it's nice and long, into this corner up here. So you're not going to get a perfect corner, but we just want you to make it better than it was. So if you have a look, that corner's a little bit more square now, whereas this one's still quite rounded. So you're just easing, nudging the corners out. Just giving it a little prod until I find a piece that fits into that space better. That's it. And we are nearly done. So we would again give that a kind of roll. You could use your iron. Make sure that there is no gaps. So if there's anything wrong at this stage and you haven't quite caught the fabric in, you're going to need to turn it inside out and do a slightly bigger seam allowance. Make sure you've got everything right. It was 1 centimetre. It should work perfectly for you. And then this gap at the top, obviously we've got a hole here and we don't want a hole in our sunglasses case. So we tuck that seam allowance in, make it nice and neat, give it a finger press, even better a press with the iron. While I'm here, I will give my project a quick press as well. Always makes it look a billion times more impressive when it's had a good press. It's looking gorgeous. So the final step now, you see my opening is still there, still open, but I've poked my seam allowance inside, so it lines up with the seam allowance I had. And I'm just going to top stitch. I'm going to do the whole line because it's going to be hidden inside so no one can see. So the stitching needs to go close to the edge just to make sure that we've sealed this hole. So we're going to reverse, sew, reverse, and then it is done with the sewing. So position your fabric, lower your presser foot, take a few reverse stitches. And reverse. So your line of stitching is going close to that hole. You should now obviously check that your hole has been sealed up. If it's not quite, it means you're going to need to sew closer to that edge. Your lining can now get pushed inside your glasses case. So just push it inside all the way to the bottom. If you need it, you can always use your chopstick again, or you might be able to get your hand in there quite easily. And then we need to attach your flex frame to finish this off. The final job is now to insert your flex frame into your channel. So if everything is sewn accurately, this should slide through beautifully. Now, because I would like my opening to be at the top, I'm going to slide my flex frame in like this. So one piece of the flex frame on one side, one on the other. So make sure they both go in at the same time and then just gently push till they pop out the other side. You then have a spare pin that you've been given to finish your flex frame. So your flex frame has one channel for this pin to go through. You've got two sections on this one and there's one section of the channel on that one. So you're going to push them together so that they create one long channel for your pin to drop through. When you let go, you can see that that's in place. However, that could easily fall out. It only takes me to give that a little squeeze and it will drop out. That's obviously no good. What we need is for that to be secure in place. So I've put the pin back in. At the top here, you can see that there's a tiny bit sticking out, and we need to make sure that that gets squashed flat, folded back over the pin that's there. So you can see it on the other ones that that's been done already for you. We just need to complete it with this one. So there's two ways of doing it. You could either push hard against the table, which I'm going to do because this is quite a solid table that can take it, or you could use some pliers. Either way, you are squashing that or folding that sticky out piece of metal over the pin to secure it in place. So that is now folded over the top. And now put the flex frame back into the middle a bit more, wiggle that fabric over, and you are done. That is your padded sunglasses case. So to open your case, you just need to take your thumb and forefinger, place them either side of your flex frame and squeeze. Squeeze and release. Your sunglasses should fit beautifully inside and you're ready to go.